I want to start with a specific date today, 1995.
Okay.
I was listening to Coolio, trying to figure out how to work a VCR, and the internet was, basically a series of loud beeps coming from a phone line.
Right.
But according to this stack of documents we're diving into, that is the year the Internet of Bodies officially, went live.
It definitely reframes the timeline. We tend to look at the Apple Watch or, the Aura Ring as these cutting-edge inventions.
Sure, post-2020 tech.
Exactly. But if you look at the engineering papers, specifically the history of eye standards in the Air Force Research Laboratory, the protocols for turning the human body into a network node, they were being drafted when smartphones were still pure science fiction.
And that is exactly our mission for this deep dive. We are stripping away the shiny marketing of the wellness industry and looking at the plumbing underneath.
The central premise here is that we aren't just wearing technology anymore. We are becoming the technology.
Right.
And this isn't a prediction for 2050. The research suggests this infrastructure has been operational in various forms for decades.
The term that keeps coming up in the literature is WBAN, wireless body area network. Now, to me, that sounds like I need to be cyborg to participate. But the definition is actually much broader, isn't it?
Much broader. A wireless body area network is effectively a network of computing devices that are worn on, implanted in, or placed near the body to monitor physiological data.
On, in, or near. So my smartwatch is a WBAN.
It's a node in one, yes. But so is a pacemaker. So is a smart pill you might swallow to track digestion.
Or a patch on your skin.
Or a patch. But the real aha moment in these documents isn't about the gadgets themselves. It's about the communication channels.
This is where I got stuck. I really had to pause because I assumed all these things just use Bluetooth, radio waves flying through the air from my watch to my phone.
Right, which is a good assumption.
But the research from Purdue University and MIT, and this goes all the way back to 1996, it talks about intra-body communication.
Right. And this is a crucial distinction if you want to understand where the tech is going. Bluetooth uses RF radio frequency. It radiates a signal outwards through the air.
Okay.
It consumes a fair amount of power. And crucially, anyone with the right antenna nearby can, potentially sniff that signal.
So what's the alternative then?
Using the body itself as the wire.
Hold on. My body isn't a copper wire. I'm mostly water and anxiety. How do you send a data packet through a person without, frying them?
It comes down to physics, specifically the ions in your body. We are basically bags of saline water, which makes us conductive. The technology uses something called capacitive coupling. Instead of broadcasting a high-energy wave out into the room, the device generates a tiny, low-frequency electrical field that couples directly to the skin. The signal then travels through the interstitial fluid, that's the fluid between your cells, and the conductive tissues.
So the email notification isn't flying through the air, it's literally traveling through my arm.
Effectively, yes. And there are two main reasons why engineers have been pushing for this since the 90s. One is power efficiency. It just takes less energy to send a signal through you than through the air.
Okay, that makes sense.
But the big one is security.
Because the signal stays inside me.
Exactly. It creates a body area network that is confined to your physical person. To hack it, someone would essentially have to touch you.
And this isn't hypothetical.
Not at all. Do you remember the story about Dick Cheney's pacemaker?
Vaguely. They turned off the wireless function.
In 2007, his cardiologists were genuinely terrified that someone could hack the device from a distance and, induce a heart attack to assassinate the vice president.
Wow.
So they disabled the RF capabilities. Intra-body communication is the engineering answer to that exact vulnerability. It keeps the data on the person.
That really puts the timeline into perspective. If they were worrying about heart hacking almost 20 years ago, we have to assume the solutions have become significantly more sophisticated since then.
And much more lucrative. While the military drove the early innovation, the current explosion is all about healthcare 4.0.
We saw that figure in the financial reports. A $56 billion market share for remote patient monitoring.
It's massive, and the players are exactly who you'd expect. Amazon, Microsoft, Azure, Oracle, Google, they're all building the back end for this.
But here's where the rubber meets the road. How do they actually get the data from my body, my own sort of private network, into their cloud? Because I see a lot of acronyms here. FHIR, HL7. They sound like boring administrative codes.
They are boring, but they're also the pipes. FHIR is Fast Healthcare Interoperability Resources. HL7 is Health Level 7.
Okay.
Think of these as the translation layer. They are the agreed-upon standards that allow a medical device to talk to a hospital server, which talks to an insurance database.
So these are the protocols that ensure my heart rate data doesn't just stay on my watch, but flows seamlessly into the permanent record in the cloud?
Precisely. It binds the biological data to the electronic health record. But I think the most shocking part of the commercial research is that they're moving away from wearables entirely.
This is the human activity recognition radar. I had to reread this section twice. You're saying they don't even need the watch?
Not necessarily. If you look at the specs for modern smart homes and electronic corridors in smart cities, they're utilizing signals that are already there. Wi-Fi, millimeter waves, even visible light from smart bulbs.
Explain how that works. If I'm just sitting on my couch, how does my Wi-Fi router know my heart rate?
It's the Doppler effect, combined with something called channel state information, or CSI. When a Wi-Fi wave travels across a room and hits you, it bounces back. But because your chest is moving, expanding and contracting as you breathe, that bounce changes slightly.
It changes the frequency.
Minute changes. But with enough processing power, and AI is getting very, very good at this, the router can analyze those distortions to determine your breathing rate, your heartbeat, even your posture.
So they can tell if you've fallen down.
They can tell if you've fallen down. They can tell if you're pacing nervously.
That's incredibly invasive. I get the pitch, grandma falls and the house calls 911. That's great.
That's the selling point.
But it also means the house is constantly performing a medical scan on everyone inside it.
And that data feeds into the concept of the digital twin. This is a term the Department of Defense and the healthcare industry are both using heavily right now.
I've heard of digital twins for things like jet engines. You build a virtual copy of the engine to see when it might break.
Right. Now apply that to a human being. The documentation from the 2023 Congressional Modeling and Simulation Caucus is pretty explicit. They aren't talking about a cartoon avatar. They're talking about a biocomputational model of you that runs at the cellular, tissue, and organ level.
So a simulation in my biology.
A functional simulation. The goal is to be able to run scenarios on your digital twin instead of on you. Let's say a doctor wants to know how you'll react to a new heart medication.
Yep.
Instead of giving it to you and, hoping you don't have a seizure, they dose your digital twin. The simulation processes your unique genetic and physiological data and predicts the outcome.
That sounds miraculous for medicine. But if the Department of Defense has been working on this for 50 years, which the timeline suggests, I assume they aren't just using it to lower my cholesterol.
No, this brings us behind the green door.
I love that phrase, by the way. It sounds like a spy novel.
It's classic military slang for the classified world. The notes lay out the network hierarchy. You have NIPRNet for unclassified stuff, SIPRNet for secret, and JWICS, the Joint Worldwide Intelligence Communication System for top secret intelligence.
Right.
And the argument in these documents is that the Internet of Bodies plugs directly into these command and control networks.
And specifically, it links to something called the Signature Reduction Force. The Newsweek article referenced here claims this is an undercover army of 60,000 people.
60,000 strong. And signature reduction is the key concept. In the old days, being undercover meant, wearing a fake mustache and carrying a forged passport.
Yeah.
In the era of the Internet of Bodies, your signature is your biometric data. It's your gait, your heat signature, your heart rate variability.
So this course is operating in the gray zone. Not quite war, not quite peace. And they're using cyber personas and biological masking to operate undetected.
Exactly. But it goes beyond just hiding. The Air Force Research Laboratory materials talk about human augmentation.
Cognitive warfare.
Cognitive warfare. They aren't just monitoring the soldier, they are optimizing them.
This is the super soldier stuff. But I want to ground this because it sounds like a comic book. What are they actually doing to these people?
A lot of it centers on the vagus nerve. That's the major nerve running from your brain down to your gut.
Right.
The Air Force research details non-surgical neurotechnology, basically using a device that looks like an electric razor, similar to a commercial device called GammaCore, to stimulate the vagus nerve through the skin of the neck.
And what does zapping your neck actually achieve?
According to their data, it induces a state of flow. It can accelerate learning by 20 to 35%. They specifically mention language training like learning Arabic rapidly.
So it's not just about focus.
It reduces anxiety and keeps a pilot hyper-focused for long durations without drugs.
Okay, that I can wrap my head around. It's like hacking the body's stress response. But the notes also mention read-write capabilities to the brain. That feels like a massive leap from neck zapping.
It is a leap, but the literature supports it. Read is interpreting neural signals. So, knowing what someone is seeing or intending to do. Write is the ability to input signals.
And the references to brain-to-brain communication.
Go back to papers from 2013 and 2014. They actually mention the show Sense8, right?
They do, as a pop culture parallel.
But the application is things like swarming drones. If you can link a pilot's neural pathways directly to a swarm of drones, you remove the lag time of hands and joysticks. You simply think the command, and the swarm executes.
You dissolve the barrier between the human operator and the machine.
Exactly.
It's fascinating because it forces us to look at the human body not as a, biological temple, but as a piece of electrical hardware. And that actually segues into one of the weirdest parts of this research stack.
The woo-woo factor.
Right, the intersection of biology and physics. The source material seems really frustrated that people dismiss this stuff as spiritual. It talks about bioelectromagnetics.
Well, historically, if you talked about the human aura, you were in the realm of mysticism. But the National Institutes of Health in these engineering bodies approach it as biofields. It's measurable physics. Every time your heart beats, every time a neuron fires, it generates a tiny electrical field.
And this is where the map gets interesting. The researcher points out that if you look at the IE sensor placement maps, the diagrams of where engineers say you should put sensors for the best data, they line up perfectly with ancient chakra points.
They do. And I think it's important to be the skeptic here for a second. It's likely not, because IE engineers are secretly studying ancient Vedic texts.
That's a coincidence.
It's anatomical convergence. Think about where those points are. The wrist, the carotid artery in the neck, the solar plexus, the ankles.
Oh, okay.
These are the areas of highest blood flow and highest nerve density. They are physically the loudest parts of the body.
So if you're a mystic trying to feel energy or an engineer trying to pick up a Wi-Fi signal from a blood cell, you go to the same spots.
Exactly. It's an engineering reality that just happens to align with historical tradition. But the tech is moving past skin surface sensors anyway. We need to talk about the Internet of Bio-Nano things.
Just when I thought we were done, we go molecular.
We have to. The research discusses the shift from silicon chips to molecular communication. This is using the body's own biological structures, cells, molecules, DNA, to transmit data.
So instead of a chip sending a radio wave, you have a molecule carrying a message to another molecule.
Correct. It allows for a network to exist inside the tissue, completely invisible to the naked eye, self-powered by the body's own chemical energy.
Which brings us to the inevitable question. Why? Why are we doing this? Why turn the human species into walking Wi-Fi routers? Is it really just to help grandma when she falls?
If you look at the strategy documents from the UK and German governments, the answer is geopolitical. It's fear.
The national prosperity and security argument.
The argument is explicitly that human augmentation is the next arms race. The documents warn that the West cannot afford to be stalled by ethical debates about privacy or, the sanctity of the human body. Because the assumption is that China and other adversaries will not be stalled by those ethics.
So it's we have to wire our citizens because they're wiring theirs.
Precisely. And that leads to the darker side of the network-centric warfare doctrine. If every human has a unique biosignature, essentially a MAC ID, just like your laptop, then every human becomes a trackable node.
This is the targeted individual concept.
Right. If you have a MAC ID and you live in a world of electronic corridors, smart cities, smart homes, ubiquitous Wi-Fi, you can be located instantly. You can be targeted. The concept of hiding physically becomes obsolete because your digital and biological handshake is constantly pinging the network.
It's a lot to process. We've gone from 1996 dial-up to molecular surveillance in about 15 minutes.
It is dense, but I think the synthesis here is seeing the layers. This wasn't a sudden plot. It was built brick by brick. The standards in the 90s, the legislation like nano.gov in the early 2000s, the massive commercial rollout of smart tech in the 2010s.
And now, the convergence. While we were distracted by social media and smart conveniences, the infrastructure was being installed, not just in our walls, but potentially in us.
And that leads to the final, somewhat provocative thought that the source material leaves us with. It's about ownership.
The terms of service.
We click agree on everything.
Okay.
We upgrade the phone. We wear the watch. We accept the new medical treatment. But if your body is generating data that feeds a digital twin,
Right.
and that digital twin sits on a server owned by a corporation or a government who owns you,
Are you the user of the network? Or are you just the hardware that the network runs on?
that is the fundamental conclusion of the Internet of Bodies. And I don't think we've collectively answered it yet.
On that incredibly heavy note, I think I'm going to go take a walk. Without my phone. Maybe check my pulse the old-fashioned way.
Always a good idea to stay analog for a bit.
Thanks for diving in with us. Stay curious, and maybe, just maybe, read the fine print next time.